Sense of Obligation by Harry Harrison, Part 2. Just before sunset, Brion heard clanking and the throbbing whine of a sandcar's engine coming from the west. With each second the noise grew louder, coming their way. The tracks squeaked as the car turned around the rock spire, obviously seeking them out. A large carrier, big as a truck. It stopped before them in a cloud of its own dust, and the driver kicked the door open. "Get in here and fast," the man shouted. "You're letting in all the heat." He gunned the engine, ready to kick in the gears, looking at them irritatedly. Ignoring the driver's nervous instructions, Brion carefully placed Lee on the rear seat before he pulled the door shut. The car surged forward instantly, a blast of icy air pouring from the air-cooling vents. It wasn't cold in the vehicle, but the temperature was at least 40 degrees lower than the outer air. Brion covered Lee with all their extra clothing to prevent any further shock to her system. The driver, hunched over the wheel and driving with an intense speed, hadn't said a word to them since they had entered. Brion looked up as another man stepped from the engine compartment in the rear of the car. He was thin, harried-looking, pointing a gun. "Who are you?" he said, without a trace of warmth in his voice. It was a strange reception, but Brion was beginning to realize that Dis was a strange planet. He sat, relaxed and unmoving, keeping his voice pitched low. The other man chewed at his lip nervously, and Brion didn't want to startle him into pulling the trigger. "My name is Brandd. We landed from space 2 nights ago and have been walking in the desert ever since. Now don't get excited and shoot the gun when I tell you this, but both Vion and Ijhel are dead." The man with the gun gasped. His eyes widened. The driver threw a single frightened look over his shoulder, then turned quickly back to the wheel. Brion's probe had hit its mark. If these men weren't from the Cultural Relationships Foundation, they at least knew a lot about it. It seemed safe to assume they were CRF men. "When they were shot the girl and I escaped. We were trying to reach the city and contact you. You are from the Foundation, aren't you?" "Yes, of course," the man said, lowering the gun. He stared glassy-eyed into space for a moment, nervously working his teeth against his lip. Startled at his own inattention, he raised the gun again. "If you're Brandd, there's something I want to know." Rummaging in his breast pocket with his free hand, he brought out a yellow message form. He moved his lips as he reread the message. "Now answer me, if you can, what are the last 3 events in the—" He took a quick look at the paper again. "In the 20s? Chess finals, rifle prone position, and fencing playoffs. Why?" The man grunted and slid the pistol back into its holder, satisfied. "I'm Fossil," he said, and waved the message at Brion. "This is Ijhel's last will and testament, relayed to us by the Nijord blockade control. He thought he was going to die, and he sure was right. Passed on his job to you. You're in charge. I was Merv's second-in-command until he was poisoned. I was supposed to work for Ihjel, and now I guess I'm yours. At least until tomorrow, when we'll have everything packed and get off this hell planet." "What do you mean tomorrow?" Brion asked. "It's 3 days to deadline, and we still have a job to do." Fossil had dropped heavily into one of the seats, and he sprang to his feet again, clutching the seat back to keep his balance in the swaying car. 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 minutes. What difference does it make? His voice rose shrilly with each word, and he had to make a definite effort to master himself before he could go on. "Look, you don't know anything about this. You just came, and that's your bad luck. My bad luck is being assigned to this death trap and watching the depraved and filthy things the natives do, and trying to be polite to them even when they are killing my friends, and those Nijord bombers up there with their hands on the triggers. One of those bombardiers is going to start thinking about home and about the cobalt bombs down here, and he's going to press that button, deadline or no deadline. Sit down, Fossil. Sit down and take a rest." There was sympathy in Brion's voice, but also the firmness of an order. Fossil swayed for a second longer, then collapsed. He sat with his cheek against the window, eyes closed. A pulse throbbed visibly in his temple, and his lips worked. Under too much tension for too long a time. This was the atmosphere that hung heavily in the air at the CRF building when they arrived. Despair and defeat. The doctor was the only one who didn't share this mood as he bustled Lee off to the clinic with prompt efficiency. He obviously had enough patience to keep his mind occupied. With the others, the feeling of depression was unmistakable. From the first instant they had driven through the automatic garage door, Brion had swum in this miasma of defeat. It was omnipresent and hard to ignore. As soon as he had eaten, he went with Fossil into what was to have been Ijhel's office. Through the transparent walls, he could see the staff packing the records, crating them for shipment. Fossil seemed less nervous now that he was no longer in command. Brion rejected any idea he had of letting the man know that he was only a green novice in the Foundation. He was going to need all the authority he could muster, since they would undoubtedly hate him for what he was going to do. Better take notes of this, Fossil, and have it typed. I'll sign it. The printed words always carried them all. Most authority. All preparations for leaving are to be stopped at once. Records are to be returned to the files. We are going to stay here just as long as we have clearance from the Nijorders. If this operation is unsuccessful, we will all leave together when the time expires. We will take whatever personal baggage we can carry by hand. Everything else stays here. Perhaps you don't realize we are here to save a planet, not file cabin. It's full of papers. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Fossil flush, then angrily transcribe his notes. As soon as that is typed, bring it back, and all the reports as to what has been accomplished on this project. That will be all for now. Fossil stamped out, and a minute later Brion saw the shocked, angry looks from the workers in the outer office. Turning his back to them, he opened the drawers in the desk, one after another. The top drawer was empty, except for a sealed envelope. It was addressed to Winner Ijhel. Brion looked at it thoughtfully, then ripped it open. The letter inside was handwritten. Ijhel, I've had the official word that you are on the way to relieve me, and I am forced to admit I feel only an intense satisfaction. You've had the experience on these outlaw planets and can get along with the odd types. I have been specializing in research for the last 20 years. And the only reason I was appointed planetary supervisor on Nijord was because of the observation and application facilities. I'm the research type, not the office type. No one has ever denied that. You're going to have trouble with the staff, so you had better realize that they are all compulsory volunteers. Half are clerical people from my staff. The others a mixed bag of whoever was close enough to be pulled in on this crash assignment. It developed so fast we never saw it coming, and I'm afraid we've done little or nothing to stop it. We can't get access to the natives here, not in the slightest. It's frightening. They don't fit. I've done poison distributions on a dozen different factors, and none of them can be equated. The Pareto extrapolations don't work. Our field men can't even talk to the natives, and 2 have been killed trying. The ruling class is unapro. Ihjel and the rest just keep their mouths shut and walk away. I'm going to take a chance and try to talk to Ligmagd. Perhaps I can make him see sense. I doubt if it will work, and there is a chance he will try violence with me. The nobility here are very prone to violence. If I get back all right, you won't see this note. Otherwise, goodbye Ihjel. Try to do a better job than I did. Aston Merv P.S. There is a problem, The staff, they are supposed to be saviors, but without exception they all loathe the Desans. I'm afraid I do too. Brion ticked off the relevant points in the letter. He had to find some way of discovering what Pareto extrapolations were without uncovering his own lack of knowledge. The staff would vanish in 5 minutes if they knew how green he was at the job. Poison distribution made more sense. It was used in physics as the unchained probability of an event that would be true at all times, such as the number of particles that would be given off by a lump radioactive matter during a short period. From the way Merv used it in his letter, it looked as if the Societics people had found measurable applications in societies and groups, at least on other planets. None of the rules seemed to be working on Dis. Ihjel had admitted that, and Merv's death had proven it. Brion wondered who this Ligmagd was who appeared to have killed Merv. A forged cough broke through Brion's concentration, and he realized that Fossil had been standing in front of his desk for some minutes. When Brion looked up at the man, he was mopping perspiration from his face. Your air conditioner seems to be out of order, he said. Should I have the mechanic look at it? There's nothing wrong with the machine, I'm just adapting to Dis climate. Anything else, Fossil? The assistant had a doubting look that he didn't succeed in hiding. He also had trouble believing the literal truth. He placed the small stack of file folders on the desk. These are the reports to date, everything we have uncovered about the Desans. It's not very much, however, considering the antisocial attitudes on this lousy world. It is the best we could do. A sudden thought hit him, and his eyes narrowed slyly. It can't be helped, but some of the staff have been wondering out loud about that native that contacted us. How did you get him to help you? We've never gotten to first base with these people, and as soon as you land, you have one working for you. You can't stop people from thinking about it, you being a newcomer and a stranger. After all, it looks a little odd. He broke off in mid-sentence as Brion looked up in a cold fury. I can't stop people from thinking about it, but I can stop them from talking. Our job is to contact the Descends and end this suicidal war. I have done more in one day than all of you have done since you arrived. I have accomplished this because I am better at my work than the rest of you. That is all the information any of you are going to receive. You are dismissed. White with anger, Fossil turned on his heel and stamped out, to spread the word about what a slave driver the new director was. They would then all hate him passionately, which was just the way he wanted it. He couldn't risk exposure as the tyro he was, and perhaps a new emotion, other than disgust and defeat, might jar them into a little action. They certainly couldn't do any worse than they had been doing. It was a frightening amount of responsibility. For the first time since setting foot on this barb, Eric Planet Brion had time to stop and think. He was taking an awful lot upon himself. He knew nothing about this world, nor about the powers involved in the conflict. Here he sat pretending to be in charge of an organization he had first heard about only a few weeks earlier. It was a frightening situation. Should he slide out from under? There was just one possible answer, and that was no. Until he found someone else. Who could do better? He seemed to be the one best suited for the job, and Ijhel's opinion had to count for something. Brion had felt the surety of the man's convictions that Brion was the only one who might possibly succeed in this difficult spot. Let it go at that. If he had any qualms, it would be best to put them behind him. Aside from everything else, there was a primary bit of loyalty involved. Ihjel had been an Anvharian and a winner. Maybe it was a provincial attitude to hold in this great big universe. Anvhar was certainly far enough away from here. But honor is very important to a man who must stand alone. He had a debt to Ijhel, and he was going to pay it off. Once the decision had been made, he felt easier. There was an intercom on the desk in front of him, and he leaned with a heavy thumb on the button labeled Fossil. Yes, even through the speaker. The man's voice was cold and efficient with ill-concealed hatred. Who is Ligmagd, and did the former director ever return from seeing him? Magd is a title that means roughly noble or lord. Ligmagd is the local overlord. He has an ugly stone heap of a building just outside the city. He seems to be the mouthpiece for the group of Magter that are pushing this idiotic war. As to your second question, I have to answer yes and no. Our director Merv's head outside the door next morning with all the skin gone. We knew it was him because the doctor identified the bridgework in his mouth. You understand? All pretense of control had vanished, and Fossil almost shrieked the last words. They were all close to cracking up, if he was any example. Brion broke in quickly. That will be all, Fossil. Just get word to the doctor that I would like to see him as soon as I can. He broke the connection and opened the first of the folders. By the time the doctor called, he had skimmed the reports and was reading the relevant ones in greater detail. Putting on his warm coat, he went through the outer office. The few workers still on duty turned their backs in frigid silence. Dr. Stein had a pink and shiny bald head that rose above a thick black beard. Brion liked him at once. Anyone with enough firmness of mind to keep a beard in this climate was a pleasant exception after what he had met so far. How's the new patient, doctor? Stein combed his beard with stubby fingers before answering. Diagnosis, heat syncope, prognosis, complete recovery. Condition fair considering the dehydration and extensive sunburn. I've treated the burns and a saline drip is taking care of the other. She just missed going into Ihjel. I have her under sedation now. I'd like to have her up and helping me tomorrow morning. Could she do this with stimulants or drugs? She could, but I don't like it. There might be side factors, perhaps long-standing debilitation. It's a chance we will have to take. In less than 70 hours, this planet is due for destruction. In attempting to avert that tragedy, I'm expendable, as is everyone else here. Agreed, the doctor grunted. It deep in his beard and looked Brion's immense frame up and down. Agreed, he said, almost happily. It is a distinct pleasure to see something beside black defeat around here. I'll go along with you. Well, you can help me right now. I checked the personnel roster and discovered that out of the 28 people working here there isn't a physical scientist of any kind other than yourself. A scruffy bunch of button pushers and theoretician. It's not worth a damn for field work, the whole bunch of them. The doctor toed the floor switch on a waste receptacle and spat into it with feeling. Then I'm going to depend on you for some straight answers, Brion said. This is an unstandard operation, and the standard techniques just don't begin to make sense. Even Poisson distributions and Pareto extrapolations don't apply here. Stein nodded agreement, and Brion relaxed a bit. He had just relieved himself of his entire knowledge of societics, and it had sounded authentic. The more I look at it, the more I believe that this is a physical problem, something to sew with the exotic and massive adjustments the Descends have made to this hellish environment. Could this tie up in any way with their absolutely suicidal attitude towards the cobalt bombs? Could it? Could it? Dr. Stein paced the floor rapidly on his stocky legs, twining his fingers behind his back. You are bloody well right it could. Someone is thinking at last and not just punching bloody numbers into a machine and sitting and scratching while waiting for the screen to light up with the answers. You know how Descends exist? Brion shook his head no. The fools here think it disgusting, but I call it fascinating. They have found ways to join in a symbiotic relationship. If with the life forms on this planet, even a parasitic relationship, you must realize that living organisms will do anything to survive. Castaways at sea will drink any liquid at all in their search for water. Disgust at this is only the attitude of the overprotected who have never experienced extreme thirst or hunger. Well, here on Dis you have a planet of castaways. Stein opened the door of the pharmacy. This talk of the Erst makes me dry. With economically efficient motions he poured grain alcohol into a beaker, thinned it with distilled water and flavored it with some flavor crystals from a bottle. He filled 2 glasses and handed Brion one. It didn't taste bad at all. How do you mean parasitic, doctor? Aren't we all parasites of the lower life forms? Meat animals, vegetables, and such? No, you miss the point. I speak of acidic in the exact meaning of the word. You must realize that to a biologist there is no real difference between a parasitism, symbiosis, mutualism, biontergacy, commensalism. Stop, Brion said. Those are just meaningless sounds to me. If that is what makes this planet tick, I'm beginning to see why the rest of the staff has that lost feeling. It is just a matter of degree of the same thing. Look, you have a kind of crustacean living in the lakes here, very much like an ordinary crab. It has large claws in which it holds anemones, tentacled sea animals with no power of motion. The crustacean waves these around to gather food and eats the pieces they capture that are too big for them. This is biontergacy, 2 creatures living and working together, yet each capable of existing alone. Now, this same crustacean has a parasite living under its shell, a degenerated form of a snail that has lost all powers of movement. A true parasite that takes food from its host's body and gives nothing in return. Inside this snail's gut there is a protozoan that lives off the snail's ingested food. Yet this little organism is not a parasite as you might think at first, but a symbiote. It takes food from the snail, but at the same time it secretes a chemical that aids the snail's digestion of the food. Do you get the picture? All these life forms exist in a complicated interdependence. Brion frowned in concentration, sipping at the drink. It's making some kind of sense now. Symbiosis, parasitism, and all the rest are just ways of describing variations of the same basic process of living together. And there is probably a grading and shading between some of these that make the exact relationship hard to define. Precisely. Existence is so difficult on this world that the competing forms have almost died out. There are still a few left, preying off the others. It was the cooperating and interdependent life forms that really won out in the race for survival. I say life forms with intent. The creatures here are mostly a mixture of plant and animal, like the lichens you have elsewhere. The Descends have a creature, or they call a vide that they use for water when traveling. It has rudimentary powers of motion from its animal parts, yet uses photosynthesis and stores water like a plant. When the Descends drink from it, the thing taps their blood stream for food elements. I know, Brion said wryly. I drank from one. You can see my scars. I'm beginning to comprehend how the Descends fit into the physical pattern of their world, and I realize it must have all kinds of psychological effects on them. Do you think this has any effect on their social organization? An important one. But maybe I'm making too many suppositions now. Perhaps your researchers upstairs can tell you better. After all, this is their field. Brion had studied the reports on the social setup, and not one word of them made sense. They were a solid maze of unknown symbols and cryptic charts. Please continue, Doctor, he insisted. The Societics reports are valueless so far. There are factors missing. You are the only one I have talked to so far who can give me any intelligent reports or answers. All right then, be it on your own head. The way I see it, you've got no society here at all, just a bunch of rugged individualists. Each one for himself, getting nourishment from the other life forms of the planet. If they have a society, it is orientated towards the rest of the planetary life, instead of towards other human beings. Perhaps that's why your figures don't make sense. They are set up for human societies. In their relations with each other, these people are completely different. What about the Magter, the upper-class types who build castles and are causing all this trouble? I have no explanation, Dr. Stein grumbled. My theories hold water and seem logical enough up to this point. But the Magter are the exception, and I have no idea why. They are completely different from the rest of the Descends. Argumentative, bloodthirsty, looking for planetary conquest instead of peace. They aren't rulers, not in the real sense. They hold power because nobody else wants it. They grant mining concessions to offworlders because they are the only ones with a sense of property. Maybe I'm going out on a limb, but if you can find out why they are so different, you may be onto the clue to our difficulties. For the first time since his arrival, Brion began to feel a touch of enthusiasm, plus the remote possibility that there might even be a solution to the deadly problem. He drained his glass and stood up. I hope you'll wake your patient early, Doctor. You might be as interested in talking to her as I am. If what you told me is true, she could well be our key to the answer. Her name is Professor Lee Moores, and she is just out from Earth with degrees in exobiology and anthropology, and has a head stuffed with vital facts. Wonderful, Stein said. I shall take care of the head not only because it is so pretty, but because of its knowledge. Though we totter on the edge of atomic destruction, I have a strange feeling of optimism, for the first time since I landed on this planet. Roman 9, the guard inside the front entrance of the Foundation building, jumped at the thunderous noise and reached for his gun. He dropped his hand sheepishly when he realized it was only a sneeze, though a gargantuan one. Brion came up, sniffling, huddling down into his coat. I'm going out before I catch pneumonia, he said. The guard saluted dumbly, and after checking his proxim detector screens, he turned off the light and opened the door. Brion slipped out, and the heavy portal thudded shut behind him. The street was still warm from the heat of the day, and he sighed happily and opened his coat. This was partially a reconnaissance trip, and partly to get warmed up. There was little else he could do in the building. The staff had long since retired. He had slept himself for half an hour, and now was refreshed and ready to work. All of the reports he could understand had been read and reread until they were memorized. He could use the time now, while the rest of them were asleep, to get better acquainted with the main city of Dis. As he walked the dark streets, he realized how alien the Desan way of life was to everything he knew. This city, Hovedstad, literally meant main place in the native language, and that's all it was. It was only the presence of the offworlders that made it into a city. Building after building, standing deserted, bore the names of mining companies, traders, space transporters. None of them were occupied now. Some still had lights burning, switched on by automatic apparatus. Others were as dark as the Desan structures. There weren't many of these native constructions, and they seemed out of place among the rammed earth and prefab off-world buildings. Brion examined one that was dimly illumined by the light on the corner of Vegan Smelters, Limited. It consisted of a single large room resting flat on the ground. There were no windows, and the whole thing appeared to have been constructed of some sort of woven material plastered with stone-hard mud. There was nothing blocking the door, and he was thinking seriously of going in when he became aware that he was being followed. It was only a slight noise, almost lost in a night. Normally it would never have been noticed, but tonight Brion was listening with his entire body. Someone was behind him, swallowed up in the pools of darkness. Brion shrank back against the wall. There was very little chance this could be anyone but a Desan. He had a sudden memory of Merv's severed head as it had been discovered outside the door. Ijhel had helped him train his empathetic sense, and he reached out with it. It was Diffika. Working in the dark, he could be sure of nothing. Was he getting a reaction, or just wishing for one? Why did it have a ring of familiarity to it? A sudden idea struck him. "Ulf," he said very softly. "This is Brion." He crouched, ready for any attack. "I know," a voice said softly in the night. "Do not talk. Walk in the direction you were going before." Asking questions now would accomplish nothing. Brion turned instantly and did as he was bidden. The buildings grew farther apart until he realized from the sand underfoot that he was back in the planet-wide desert. It could be a trap. He hadn't recognized the voice behind the whisper. Yet he still had to take this chance. A darker shape appeared in the dark night near him, and a burning hot hand touched his arm lightly. "We can talk here." The words were louder, and this time Brion recognized the voice. "I have brought you to the city as I told you I would. Have you done as you said you would?" "I am doing it, but I need your help, Ulf. It is your life that needs saving, and you must do your part." "What is truth?" Ulf interrupted. "All I hear is difference. The Magter have done well, though they live the wrong way. I myself have had bronze from them, and there is water just for going. Now they tell us they are getting a different world for us all from the sky peep. Oh, and that is good, too. Your people are the essence of evil, and there is no harm in killing them. Why didn't you kill me when you had the chance?" "I could have. But there is something more important. What is truth? What is on the papers that fall from the sky?" He sighed once, deeply. "There are black marks on them that some can tell meaning from. What did the ship voices mean when they said the Magter were destroying the world and must be put down?" "I did not hear the voices, but I know one who did, and he went to talk to Ligmagd, which was foolish, because he was killed as he should have known he would be. The ships were telling you the truth, Ulv. The Magter have bombs that will destroy Nijord, the next planet. There." He pointed to the star newly rising in the east. "The bombs cannot be stopped. Unless the bombs are found or the Magter drop their suicidal plans, this planet will burst into flames in 3 days' time." Ulv turned and started away. Brion called after him. "Wait, will you help me stop this? How can I find you again?" "I must think," the Desan answered, still moving away. "I will find you." He was gone. Brion shivered in the sudden chill of the air and wrapped the coat tighter around him. He started walking back towards the warmer streets of the city. It was dawn when he reached the Foundation building. A new guard was at the front entrance. No amount of hammering or threats could convince the man to open until Fossil came down, yawning and blinking with sleep. He was starting some complaint when Brion cut him off curtly and ordered him to finish dressing and report for work at once. Still feeling elated, he steamed into his office and cursed the overly efficient character who had turned on his air conditioner to chill the room. Again, when he turned it off this time, he removed enough of the vital parts to keep it out of order for the duration. When Fossil came in, he was still yawning behind his fist. Obviously a low morning sugar type. "Before you fall on your face, go out and get some coffee," Brion said. 2 cups, I'll have a cup too." "That won't be necessary," Fossil said, drawing himself up stiffly. "I'll call the canteen if you wish some," he said. It in the iciest tone he could manage this early in the morning. In his enthusiasm, Brion had forgotten the hate campaign he had directed against himself. "Suit yourself," he snapped, getting back into the role. "But the next time you yawn, there'll be a negative entry in your service record. If that's clear, you can brief me on this organization's visible relations with the Desans. How do they take us?" Fossil choked and swallowed a yawn. "I believe they look on the CRF people as some species of simpletons, sir. They hate all off-worlders. Memory of their desertion has been passed on verbally for generations. So by their one-to-one logic, we should either hate back or go away. We stay instead, and give them food, water, medicine, and artifacts. Because of this, they let us remain on sufferance. I imagine they consider us do-gooder idiots, and as long as we cause no trouble, they'll let us stay." He was struggling miserably to suppress a yawn, so Brion turned his back and gave him a chance to get it out. "What about the Nijorders? How much do they know of our work?" Brion looked out the window at dusty buildings, outlined in purple against the violent colors of the desert sunrise. Ijhel is a cooperating planet and has full knowledge at all executive levels. They are giving us all the aid they can. Well, now is the time to ask for more. Can I contact the commander of the blockading fleet? There is a scrambler connection right through to him. I'll set it up. Fossil bent over the desk and punched a number into the phone controls. The screen flowed with the black and white patterns of the scrambler. That's all, Fossil. I want privacy for this talk. What's the commander's name? Professor Kraft. He's a physicist. They have no military men at all, so they called him in for the construction of the bombs and energy weapons. He's still in charge. Fossil yawned extravagantly as he went out the door. The professor commander was very old, with wispy gray hair and a network of wrinkles surrounding his eyes. His image shimmered, then cleared as the scrambler units aligned. "You must be Brion Brandd," he said. "I have to tell you how sorry we all are that your friend Ijhel and the two others had to die after coming so far to help us. I'm sure you are very happy to have had a friend like that." "Why, yes, of course," Brion said, reaching for the scattered fragments of his thought processes. It took an effort to remember the first conflict now that he was worrying about the death of a planet. "Very kind of you to mention it, but I would like to find out a few things about you if I could. Anything at all." "We are at your disposal. Before we begin, though, I shall pass on the thanks of our council for your aid in joining us. Even if we are eventually forced to drop the bombs, we shall never forget that your organization did everything possible to avert the disaster." Once again, Brion was caught off balance. For an instant, he wondered if Kraft was being insincere, then recognized the baseness of this thought. The completeness of the man's humanity was obvious and compelling. The thought passed through Brion's mind that now he had an additional reason for wanting the war ended without destruction on either side. He very much wanted to visit Ijhel and see these people on their home grounds. Professor Kraft waited patiently and silently, while Brion pulled his thoughts together and answered. "I still hope that this thing can be stopped in time. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I want to see Ligmagd, and I thought it would be better if I had a legitimate reason. Are you in contact with him?" Kraft shook his head. "No, not really in contact. When this trouble started, I sent him a transceiver so we could talk directly, but he has delivered his ultimatum, speaking for the Magter. The only terms he will hear are unconditional surrender. His receiver is on, but he has said that is the only message he will answer. Not much chance of him ever being told that," Brion said. "There was, at one time. I hope you realize, Brion, that the decision to bomb Dis was not easily arrived at. A great many people, myself included, voted for unconditional surrender. We lost the vote by a very small margin." Brion was getting used to these philosophical body blows, and he rolled with the punches now. "Are there any of your people left on this planet, or do you have any troops I can call on for help? This is still a remote possibility, but if I do find out where the bombs or the launcher are, a surprise raid would knock them out. We have no people left in Hovstad now. All the ones who weren't evacuated were killed. But there are commando teams standing by here to make a landing if the weapons are detected. The Descends must depend on secrecy to protect their armament, since we have both the manpower and the technology to reach any objective. We also have technicians and other volunteers looking for the weapon sites. They have not been successful as yet, and most of them were killed soon after landing." Kraft hesitated for a moment. "There is another group that you should know about. You will need all the factors. There are some of our people in the desert outside of Hovstad. We do not officially approve of them, though they have a good deal of popular support. Mostly young men, operating as raiders, killing and destroying with very little compunction. They are attempting to uncover the weapons by sheer strength of arms." This was the best news yet. Brion controlled his voice and kept his expression calm when he spoke. "I don't know how far I can stretch your cooperation, but could you possibly tell me how to contact them?" Kraft out himself a small smile. "I'll give you the wavelength on which you can reach their radio. They call themselves the Ijhel Army. When you talk to them, you can do me a favor. Pass on a message, just to prove things aren't bad enough. They've become a little worse. One of our technical crews has detected jump space energy transmissions in the planetary crust. The Descends are apparently testing their projector sooner than we had estimated. Our deadline has been revised by 1 day. I'm afraid there are only 2 days left before you must evacuate. His eyes were large with compassion. I'm sorry. I know this will make your job that much harder. Brion didn't want to think about the loss of a full day from his already small deadline. Have you told the Descends this as yet? No, Kraft told him. The decision was reached just a few minutes before your call. It is going on the radio to Ligmag now. Can you cancel the transmission and let me take the message in person? I can do that, Kraft thought for a moment, but it would surely mean your death at their hands. They have no hesitation in killing any of our people. I would prefer to send it by radio. If you do that, you will be interfering with my plans and perhaps destroying them under the guise of saving my life. Isn't my life I own to dispose of as I will. For the first time, Professor Kraft was upset. I'm sorry, terribly sorry. I'm letting my concerns and worry wash over into my public affairs. Of course you may do as you please. I could never think of stopping you. He turned and said something inaudible off-screen. The call is cancelled. The responsibility is yours. All our wishes for success go with you. End of transmission. End of transmission, Bria. And said, and the screen went dark. Fossil, he shouted into the intercom. Get me the best and fastest sand car we have, a driver who knows his way around and 2 men who can handle a gun and know how to take orders. We're going to get some positive action at last. It's suicide, the taller guard grumbled. Mine, not yours, so don't worry about it, Brion snapped at him. Your job is to remember your orders and keep them straight. Now, let's hear them again. The guard rolled his eyes up in silent rebellion and repeated in a toneless voice. We stay here in the car and keep the motor running while you go inside the stone pile there. We don't let anybody in the car and we try and keep them clear of the car, short of shooting them, that is. We don't come in no matter what happens or what it looks like, but wait for you here. Unless you call on the ADO, in which case we come in with the automatics going and shoot the place up, and it doesn't matter who we hit. This will only be used as a last resort. See if you can't arrange that last resort thing if you can, the other guard said, patting the heavy blue barrel of his weapon. I meant that last resort, Brion said angrily. If any guns go off without my permission, you will pay for it and pay with your necks. I want that clear. Lee understood. You are here as a rear guard and a base for me to get back to. This is my operation and mine alone, unless I call you in. Understood? He waited until all 3 men had nodded in agreement, then checked the charge on his gun. Fully loaded, it would be foolish not to go unarmed, but he had to. 1 gun wouldn't save him. He put it aside. The button radio on his collar was working and had a strong enough signal to get through any number of walls. He took off his coat, threw open the door, and stepped out into the searing brilliance of the Descend noon. There was only the desert silence, broken by the steady throb of the car's motor behind him. Stretching away to the horizon in every direction were the eternal deserts of sand. The keep stood nearby, solitary, a massive pile of black rocks. Brion plodded closer, watching for any motion from the walls. Nothing stirred. The high-walled, irregularly shaped construction sat in a ponderous silence. Brion was sweating now, only partially from the heat. He circled the thing, looking for a gate. There wasn't one at ground level. A slanting cleft in the stone could be climbed easily, but it seemed incredible that this might be the only entrance. A complete circuit proved that it was. Brion looked unhappily at the slanting and broken ramp, then cupped his hands and shouted loudly, I'm coming up. Your radio doesn't work anymore. I'm bringing the message from Ijhel that you have been waiting to hear. A slight bending of the truth without fracturing it. There was no answer. Just the hiss of wind-blown sand against the rock and the mutter of the car in the background. He started to climb. The rock underfoot was crumbling and he had to watch where he put his feet. At the same time he fought a constant impulse to look up, watching for anything falling from above. Nothing happened. When he reached the top of the wall, he was breathing hard, sweat moistened his body. There was still no one in sight. He stood on an unevenly shaped wall that appeared to circle the building. Instead of a courtyard inside it, the wall was the outer face of the structure, the domed roof rising from it. At varying intervals, dark openings gave access. The interior. When Brion looked down, the sandcar was just a dung-colored bump in the desert, already far behind him. Stooping, he went through the nearest door. There was still no one in sight. The room inside was something out of a madman's funhouse. It was higher than it was wide, irregular, and more like a hallway than a room. At one end it merged into an incline that became a stairwell. The other ended in a hole that vanished in darkness below. Oh, light of sorts filtered in through slots and holes drilled into the thick stone wall. Everything was built of the same crumble-textured but strong rock. Brion took the stairs. After a number of blind passages and wrong turns, he saw a stronger light ahead. There was food, metal, even artifacts of the unusual Desan design in the different rooms he passed through. Yet no people. The light ahead grew stronger as he approached, the passageway opening and swelling out until it met the larger central chamber. This was the heart of the strange structure. All the rooms, passageways, and halls existed just to give form to this gigantic hall. The walls rose sharply, the room circular in cross-section and growing narrower towards the top. It was a truncated cone since there was no ceiling. A hot blue disk of sky cast light on the floor below. On the floor stood a knot of men staring at Brion. Out of the corner of his eyes and with the very periphery of his consciousness, he was aware of the rest of the room. Barrels, stores, machinery, a radio transceiver, various bundles and heaps that made no sense at first glance. There was no time to look closer. Every fraction of his attention was focused on the muffled and hooded men. He had found the enemy. Everything that happened to him so far on Dis had been preparation for this moment. The attack in the desert, the escape, the dreadful heat of sun and sand. All this had tempered and prepared him. It had been nothing in itself. Now the battle would begin in earnest. None of this was conscious. His fighter's reflexes bent his shoulders, curved his hands before him as he walked softly in balance, ready to spring in any direction. Yet none of this was really necessary. All the danger so far was non-physical. When he gave this thought conscious thought, he stopped, startled. What was wrong here? None of the men had moved or made a sound. How could he even know they were men? They were so muffled and wrapped in cloth that only their eyes were exposed. No doubt existed in Brion's mind. In spite of muffled cloth and silence, he knew them for what they were. The eyes were empty of expression and unmoving, yet filled with the same negative emptiness as a bird of prey. They could look on life, death, and the rending of flesh with the same lack of interest and compassion. All this Brion knew in an instant of time without words being spoken. Between the time he lifted one foot and walked a step, he understood what he had to face. There could be no doubt, not to an empathetic. From the group of silent men poured a frost-white wave of unemotion. An empathetic shares what other men feel. He gets is knowledge of their reaction by sensing lightly their emotions, the surges of interest, hate, love, fear, desire, the sweep of large and small sensations that accompany all thought and action. The empathetic is always aware of this constant and silent surge, whether he makes the effort to understand it or not. He is like a man glancing across the open pages of a table full of books. He can see that the type, words, paragraphs, thoughts, are there even without focusing his attention to understand any of it. Then how does the man feel when he glances at the open books and sees only blank pages? The books are there, the words are not. He turns the pages of one, then others, flipping pages, searching for meaning. There is no meaning. All of the pages are blank. This was the way in which the Magter were blank, without emotions. There was a barely sensed surge and return that must have been neural impulses on a basic level, the automatic adjustments of nerve and muscle that keep an organism alive. Nothing more. Brion reached for other sensations, and there was nothing there to grasp. Either these men were apparently without emotions, or they were able to block them from his detection. It was impossible to tell which. Very little time has passed in the objective world while Brion made these discoveries. The knot of men and still looked at him, silent and unmoving. They weren't expectant, their attitude could not have been called interest, but he had come to them, and now they waited to find out why. Any questions or statements they spoke would be redundant, so they didn't speak. The responsibility was his. I have come to talk with Ligmagd. Who is he? Brion didn't like the tiny sound his voice made in the immense room. One of the men gave a slight motion to draw attention to himself. None of the others moved. They still waited. I have a message for you, Brion said, talking slowly to fill the silence of the room and the emptiness of his thoughts. This had to be handled right, but what was right? I'm from the Foundation in the city, as you undoubtedly know. I've been talking to the people on Nijord. They have a message for you. The silence grew longer. Brion had no intention of making this a monologue. He He needed facts to operate, to form an opinion. Looking at the silent forms was telling him nothing. Time stretched taut, and finally Ligmagt spoke. The Nijorders are going to surrender. It was an impossibly strange sentence. Brion had never realized before how much of the content of speech was made up of emotion. If the man had given it a positive emphasis, perhaps said it with enthusiasm, it would have meant, success, the enemy is going to surrender. This wasn't the meaning. With a rising inflection on the end, it would have been a question. Are they going to surrender? It was neither of these. The sentence carried no other message than that contained in the simplest meanings of the separate words. It had intellectual connotations, but these could only be gained from past knowledge, not from the sound of the words. There was only one message they were prepared to receive. From Nijord. Therefore, Brion was bringing the message. If that was not the message Brion was bringing, the men here were not interested. This was the vital fact. If they were not interested, he could have no further value to them. Since he came from the enemy, he was the enemy. Therefore, he would be killed. Because this was vital to his existence, Brion took the time to follow the thought through. It made logical sense, and logic was all he could depend on now. He could be talking to robots or alien creatures for the amount of human response he was receiving. You can't win this war. All you can do is hurry your own deaths. He said this with as much conviction as he could, realizing at the same time that it was wasted effort. No flicker of response stirred in the men before him. The Nijorders know you have cobalt bombs, and they have detected your jump space projector. They can't take any more chances. They have pushed the deadline closer by an entire day. There are 1.5 days left before the bombs fall, and you are all destroyed. Do you realize what that means? Is that the message? Ligmagt asked. Yes, Brion said. 2 things saved his life then. He had guessed what would happen as soon as they had his message, though he hadn't been sure. But even the suspicion had put him on his guard. This, combined with the reflexes of a winner of the 20s, was barely enough to enable him to survive. From frozen mobility, Ligmagt had catapulted into headlong attack. As he leaped forward, he drew a curved, double-edged blade from under his robes. It plunged unerringly through the spot where Brion's body had been an instant before. There had been no time to tense his muscles and jump, just space to relax them and fall to one side. His reasoning mind joined the battle as he hit the floor. Ligmagt plunged by him, turning and bringing the knife down at the same time. Brion's foot lashed out and caught the other man's leg, sending him sprawling. They were both on their feet at the same instant, facing each other. Brion now had his hands clasped before him in the unarmed man's best defense against a knife, the 2 arms protecting the body, the 2 hands joined to beat aside. A knife arm from whichever direction it came. The Desan hunched low, flipped the knife quickly from hand to hand, then thrust it again at Brion's midriff. Only by the merest fractional margin did Brion evade the attack for the second time. Ligmagt fought with complete violence. Every action was as intense as possible, deadly and thorough. There could be only one end to this unequal contest if Brion stayed on the defensive. The man with the knife. If had to win, with the next charge Brion changed tactics. He leaped inside the thrust, clutching for the knife arm. A burning slice of pain cut across his arm, then his fingers clutched the tendoned wrist. Clamped down hard, grinding shut, compressing with the tightening intensity of a closing vise. It was all he could do to simply hold on. There was no science in it, just his greater strength from exercise and existence on a heavier planet. All of this strength went to his clutching hand, because he held his own life in that hand, forcing away the knife that wanted to terminate it forever. Nothing else mattered. Neither the frightening force of the knees that thudded into his body nor the hooked fingers that reached for his eyes to tear them out. He protected his face as well as he could, while the nails tore furrows through his flesh and the cut on his arm bled freely. These were only minor things to be endured. His life depended on the grasp of the fingers of his right hand. There was a sudden immobility as he succeeded in clutching Ligmagt's other arm. It was a good grip, and he could hold the arm immobilized. They had reached stasis, standing knee to knee, their faces only a few inches apart. The muffling cloth had fallen from the Desan's face during the struggle, and empty, frigid eyes stared into Brion's. No. A flicker of emotion crossed the harsh planes of the other man's face. A great puckered white scar covered one cheek and pulled up a corner of the mouth in a cheerless grimace. It was false. There was still no expression here. Even when the pain must be growing more intense, Brion was winning if no one broke the impasse. His greater weight and strength counted now. The Desan would have to drop the knife before his arm was dislocated at the shoulder. He didn't do it. With sudden horror, Brion realized that he wasn't going to drop it, no matter what happened. A dull, hideous snap jerked through the Desan's body, and the arm hung limp and dead. No expression crossed the other man's face. The knife was still locked in the fingers of the paralyzed hand. With his other hand, Ligmagd reached across and started to pry the blade loose, ready to continue the battle one-handed. Brion raised his foot and kicked the knife free, sending it spinning across the room. Ligmagd made a fist of his good hand and crashed it into Brion's body. He was still fighting as if nothing had changed. Brion backed slowly away from the man. "Stop it," he said. "You can't win now. It's impossible." He called to the other men who were watching the unequal battle with expressionless immobility. No one answered him. With a terrible sinking sensation, Brion realized what would happen and what he had to do. Ligmagd was as heedless of his own life as he was of the life of his planet. He would press the attack no matter what damage was done to him. Brion had an insane vision of him breaking the man's other arm, fracturing both his legs, and the limbless, broken creature still coming forward. Crawling, rolling, teeth bared since they were the only remaining weapon. There was only one way to end it. Brion fainted and the Ligmagd's arm moved clear of his body. The engulfing cloth was thin and through it, Brion could see the outlines of the Desan's abdomen and rib cage. The clear location of the great nerve ganglion. It was the death blow of the Kara-T. Brion had never used it on a man. In practice, he had broken heavy boards, splintering them instantly with the short, precise stroke. The stiffened hand moving forward in a sudden surge. All the weight and energy of his body concentrated in his joined fingertips, plunging deep into the other's flesh, killing not by accident or in sudden anger. Killing because this was the only way the battle could possibly end. Like a ruined tower of flesh, the Desan crumpled and fell. Dripping blood, exhausted, Brion stood over the body of Ligmagd and stared at the dead man's allies. Death filled the room. Facing the silent Desans, Brion's thoughts hurtled about in sweeping circles. There would be no more than an instant's tick of time before the Magter avenged themselves bloodily and completely. He felt a fleeting regret for not having brought his gun, then abandoned the thought. There was no time for regrets. What could he do now? The silent watchers hadn't attacked instantly, and Brion realized that they couldn't be positive yet that Ligmagd had been killed. Only Brion knew the deadliness of that blow. Their lack of knowledge might buy him a little more time. "Ligmagd is unconscious, but will revive quickly," Brion said, pointing at the huddled body. As the eyes turned automatically to follow his finger, he began walking slowly towards the exit. "I did not want to do this, but he forced me to because he wouldn't listen to reason. Now I have something else to show you, something that I hoped it would not. It be necessary to reveal." He was saying the first words that came into his head, trying to keep them distracted as long as possible. He must only appear to be going across the room. That was the feeling he must generate. There was even time to stop for a second and straighten his rumpled clothing and brush the sweat from his eyes. Talking easily, walking slowly towards the hall out of the chamber. He was halfway there when the spell broke, and the rush began. One of the Magter knelt and touched the body and shouted a single word: "Dead." Brion hadn't waited for the official announcement. At the first movement of feet, he dived headlong for the shelter of the exit. There was a spatter of tiny missiles on the wall next to him, and he had a brief glimpse of raised blowguns before the wall intervened. He went up the dimly lit stairs 5 at a time. The pack was just behind him, voiceless and deadly. He could not gain on them. If anything, they closed the distance as he pushed his already tired body to the utmost. There was no subtlety or trick he could use now, just straightforward flight back the way he had come. A single slip on the irregular steps and it would be all over. There was someone ahead of him. If the woman had waited a few seconds more, he would certainly have been killed. But instead of slashing at him as he went by the doorway, she made the mistake of rushing to the center of the stairs, the knife ready to impale him as he came up. Without slowing, Brion fell onto his hands and easily dodged under the blow. As he passed, he twisted and seized her around the waist, picking her from the ground. When her legs lifted from under her, the woman screamed. The first human sound Brion had heard in this human anthill. His pursuers were just behind him, and he hurled the woman into them with all his strength. They fell in a tangle, and Brion used the precious seconds gained to reach the top of the building. There must have been other stairs and exits because one of the magters stood between Brion and the way down out of this trap, armed and ready to kill him if he tried to pass. As he ran towards the executioner, Brion flicked on his collar radio and shouted into it. "I'm in trouble, Or can you?" The guards in the car must have been waiting for this message. Before he had finished, there was the thud of a high-velocity slug hitting flesh, and the Descend spun and fell, blood soaking his shoulder. Brion leaped over him and headed for the ramp. "The next one is me. Hold your fire," he called. Both guards must have had their telescopic sights zeroed on the spot. They let Brion pass, then threw in a hail of semi-automatic fire that ore chunks from the stone and screamed away in noisy ricochets. Brion didn't try to see if anyone was braving this hail of covering fire. He concentrated his energies on making as quick and erratic a descent as he could. Above the sounds of the firing, he heard the car motor howl as it leaped forward. With their careful aim spoiled, the gunners switched to full automatic and unleashed a hailstorm of flying metal that bracketed the top. Up of the tower, "Cease firing," Brion gasped into the radio as he ran. The driver was good and timed his arrival with exactitude. The car reached the base of the tower at the same instant Brion did, and he burst through the door while it was still moving. No orders were necessary. He fell headlong onto a seat as the car swung in a dust-raising turn and ground into high gear back to the city. Reaching over carefully, the tall gently extracted a bit of pointed wood and fluff from a fold of Brion's pants. He cracked open the car door and just as delicately threw it out. "I knew that thing didn't touch you," he said, "since you are still among the living. They got a poison on those blowgun darts that takes all of 12 seconds to work. Lucky." Brion was beginning to realize just how lucky he was to be out of the trap alive. With information. Now that he knew more about the magter, he shuddered at his innocence in walking alone and unarmed into the tower. Skill had helped him survive, but better than average luck had been necessary. Curiosity had gotten him in, brashness and speed had taken him out. He was exhausted, battered, and bloody, but cheerfully happy. The facts about the magter were shaping themselves into a theory that might explain their attempt at racial suicide. It just needed a little time to be put into shape. Pain cut across his arm, and he jumped, startled, pieces of his thoughts crashing into ruin around him. The gunner had cracked the first aid box and was swabbing his arm with antiseptic. The knife wound was long, but not deep. Brion shivered while the bandage was going on, then quickly slipped into his coat. The air conditioner whined industriously, bringing down the temperature. There was no attempt to follow the car. When the black tower had dropped over the horizon, the guards relaxed, ran cleaning rods through their guns, and compared marksmanship. All of their antagonism towards Brion was gone. They actually smiled at him. He had given them the first chance to shoot back since they had been on this planet. The ride was uneventful, and Brion was scarcely aware of it. A theory was taking form in his mind. It was radical, unusual, and startling, yet it seemed to be the only one that fitted the facts. He pushed at it from all sides, but if there were any holes, he couldn't find them. What it needed was dispassionate proving or disproving. There was only one person on Dis who was qualified to do this. Lee was working in the lab when he came in, bent over a low-power binocular microscope. Something small, limbless, and throbbing was on the slide. She glanced up when she heard his footsteps, smiling warmly when she recognized him. Fatigue and pain had drawn her face. Her skin, glistening with burn ointment, was chapped and peeling. "I must look a wreck," she said, putting the back of her hand to her cheek. "Something like a well-oiled and lightly cooked piece of beef." She lowered her arm suddenly and took his hand in both of hers. Her palms were warm and slightly moist. "Thank you, Brion," was all she could say. Her society on Earth was highly civilized and sophisticated, able to discuss any topic without emotion and without embarrassment. This was fine in most circumstances, but made it difficult to thank a person for saving your life. However you tried to phrase it, It came out sounding like a last-act speech from an historical play. There was no doubt, however, as to what she meant. Her eyes were large and the pupils dilated by the drugs she had been given. They could not lie, nor could the emotions he sensed. He did not answer, just held her hand an instant longer. "How do you feel?" he asked, concerned. His conscience twinged as he remembered that he was the one who had ordered her out of bed and back to work today. "I should be feeling terrible," she said, with an airy wave of her hand. "But I'm walking on top of the world. I'm so loaded with painkillers and stimulants that I'm high as the moon. All the nerves to my feet feel turned off. It's like walking on 2 balls of fluff. Thanks for getting me out of that awful hospital and back to work." Brion was suddenly ashamed of having driven her from her sick bed. "Don't be sorry," Lee said, apparently reading his mind, but really seeing only his sudden drooped expression. "I'm feeling no pain, honestly. I feel a little lightheaded and foggy at times, nothing more. And this is the job I came here to do? In fact, well, it's almost impossible to tell you just how fascinating it all is. It was almost worth getting baked and parboiled for." She swung back to the microscope, centering the specimen with a turn of the stage adjustment screw. Poor Ijhel was right when he said this planet was exobiologically fascinating. This is a gastropod, a lot like Odostomia, but it has parasitical morphological changes so profound. "There's something else I remember," Brion said, interrupting her enthusiastic lecture, only half of which he could understand. "Didn't Ihjel also hope that you would give some study to the natives as well as their environment? The problem is with the Desans, not the local wildlife." "But I am studying them," Lee insisted. "The Desans have attained an incredibly advanced form of commensalism. Their lives are so intimately connected and integrated with the other life forms that they must be studied in relation to their environment. I doubt if they show as many external physical changes as little eating foot Odostomia on the slide here, but there will be surely a number of psychological changes and adjustments that will crop up. One of these might be the explanation of their urge for planetary suicide." "That may be true, but I don't think so," Brion said. "I went on a little expedition this morning and found something that has more immediate relevancy." For the first time, Lee became aware of his slightly battered condition. Her drug-grooved mind could only follow a single idea at a time and had overlooked the significance of the bandage and dirt. "I've been visiting," Brion said, stalling the question on her lips. "The Magter are the ones who are responsible for causing the trouble, and I had to see them up close before I could make any decision. It wasn't a very pleasant thing, but I found out what I wanted to know. They are different in every way from the normal Desans. I've compared them. I've talked to Ulv, the native who saved us in the desert, and I can understand him. He is not like us in many ways. He would certainly have to be, living in this oven, but he is still undeniably human. He gave us drinking water when we needed it, then brought help. The Magter, the upper-class lords of Dis, are the direct opposite. As cold-blooded and ruthless a bunch of murderers as you can possibly imagine. They tried to kill me when they met me without reason. Their clothes, habits, dwellings, manners, everything about them differs from that of the normal. Desan. More important, the Magter are as coldly efficient and inhuman as a reptile. They have no emotions, no love, no hate, anger, fear, nothing. Each of them is a chilling bundle of thought processes and reactions with all the emotions removed. "Aren't you exaggerating?" Lee asked. "After all, you can't be sure. It might just be part of their training not to reveal any emotional state. Everyone must experience emotion. States whether they like it or not. That's my main point. Everyone does, except the Magter. I can't go into all the details now, so you'll just have to take my word for it. Even at the point of death, they have no fear or hatred. It may sound impossible, but it is true." Lee tried to shake the knots from her drug-hazed mind. "I'm dull today," she said. "You'll have to excuse me. If these rulers had no emotional response, that might explain their present suicidal position. But an explanation like this raises more new problems than it supplies answers to the old ones. How did they get this way? It doesn't seem humanly possible to be without emotions. Just my point. Not humanly possible. I think these ruling class Desans aren't human at all like the other Desans. I think they are alien creatures, robots or androids, anything except men. I think they are living in disguise among the normal human dwellers. First Lee started to smile, then she changed her mind when she saw his face. "You are serious?" she asked. "Never more so. I realize it must sound as if I've had my brains bounced around too much this morning. Yet this is the only idea I can come up with that fits all of the facts. Look at the evidence yourself. One simple thing stands out clearly. It must be considered first if any theory is to hold up. That is the Magter's complete indifference to death, their own or anyone else's. Is that normal to mankind? No, but I can find a couple of explanations that I would rather explore first before dragging in an alien life form. There may have been a mutation or an inherited disease that had deformed or warped their minds. Wouldn't that be sort of self-eliminating?" Brion asked. "Anti-survival? People who die before puberty would find it a little difficult to pass on a mutation to their children. But let's not beat this one point to death. It's the totality of these people that I find so hard to accept. Any one thing might be explained away, but not the collection of them. What about their complete lack of emotion, or their manner of dress and their secrecy in general? The ordinary Desan wears a cloth kilt while the Magter cover themselves as completely as possible. They stay in their black towers and never go out except in groups. Their dead are always removed so they can't be examined. In every way they act like a race apart, and I think they are. Granted for the moment that this outlandish idea might be true, how did they get here? And why doesn't anyone know about it besides them?" "Easily enough explained," Brion insisted. "There are no written records on this planet. After the breakdown, when the handful of survivors were just trying to exist here, the aliens could have landed and moved in. Any interference could have been wiped out. Once the population began to grow, the invaders found they could keep control by staying separate, so their alien difference wouldn't be noticed." "Why should that bother them?" Lee asked. "If they are so indifferent to death, they can't have any strong thoughts on public opinion or alien body odor. Why would they bother with such a complex camouflage? And if they arrived from another planet, what has happened to the scientific ability that brought them here?" "Peace," Brion said. "I don't know enough to even be able to guess at answers to half those questions. I'm just trying to fit a theory to the facts, and the facts are clear. The Magter are so inhuman they would give me nightmares if I were sleeping these days. What we need is more evidence." "Then get it," Lee said with finality. "I'm not telling you to turn murderer, but you might try a bit of grave digging. Give me a scalpel and one of your fiends stretched out on a slab, and I'll quickly tell you what he is or is not." She turned back to the microscope and bent over the eyepiece. That was really the only way to hack the Gordian knot. Dis had only 36 more hours to live, so individual deaths shouldn't be of any concern. He had to find a dead Magter, and if none were obtainable in the proper condition, he had to violently get one of them that way. For a planetary savior, he was personally doing in an awful lot of the citizenry. He stood behind Lee, looking down at her thoughtfully while she worked. The back of her neck was turned up to him, lightly covered with gently curling hair. With one of the about-face shifts, the mind is capable of his thoughts flipped from death to life, and he experienced a strong desire to lightly caress this spot, to feel the yielding texture of female flesh. Plunging his hands deep into his pockets, he walked quickly to the door. "Get some rest soon," he called to her. "I doubt if those bugs will give you the answer. I'm going now to see if I can get the full-sized specimen you want. The truth could be anywhere. I'll stay on these until you come back," she said, not looking up from the microscope. Up under the roof was a well-equipped communications room. Brion had taken a quick look at it when he had first toured the building. The duty operator had earphones on, though only one of the phones covered an ear, and was monitoring through the bands. His shoeless feet were on the edge of the table, and he was eating a thick sandwich with his free hand. His eyes bugged when he saw Brion in the doorway, and he jumped into a flurry of action. "Hold the pose," Brion told him. "It doesn't bother me, and if you make any sudden moves, you are liable to break a phone, electrocute yourself, or choke to death. Just see if you can set the transceiver on this frequency for me." Brion wrote the number on a scratch pad and slid it over to the operator. It was the frequency Professor Commander Kraft had given him for the radio of the illegal terrorists, the Nijord army. The operator plugged in a handset and gave it to Brion. "Circuit open," he mumbled around a mouthful of still unswallowed sandwich. "This is Brandd, director of the CRF. Come in, please." He went on repeating this for more than 10 minutes before he got an answer. "Do you want? I have a message of vital urgency for you, and I would also like your help. Do you want any more information on the radio?" "No, wait there. We'll get in touch with you after dark." The carrier wave went dead 35 hours to the end of the world, and all he could do was wait. On Brion's desk when he came in were 2 neat piles of paper. As he sat down and reached for them, he was conscious of an arctic coldness in the air, a frigid blast. It was coming from the air conditioner grill, which was now covered by welded steel bars. The control unit was sealed shut. Someone was either being very funny or very efficient. Either way, it was cold. Brion kicked at the cover plate until it buckled, then bent it aside. After a careful look into the interior, he disconnected one wire and shorted it to another. He was rewarded by a number of sputtering cracks and a good quantity of smoke. The compressor moaned and expired. Fossil was standing in the door with more papers and a shocked expression. "What do you have there?" Brion asked. Fossil managed to straighten out his face and brought the folders to the desk, arranging them on the piles already there. "These are the progress reports you asked for from all units. Details to date, conclusions, suggestions, etc. And the other pile," Brion pointed. "Off-planet correspondence, commissary invoices, requisitions." He straightened the edges of the stack while he answered. "Daily report, hospital log." His voice died away and stopped as Brion carefully pushed the stack off the edge of the desk into the wastebasket. "In other words, red tape," Brion said. "Well, it's all filed." One by one, the progress reports followed the first stack into the basket until his desk was clear. Nothing. It was just what he had expected, but there had always been the off chance that one of the specialists could come up with a new approach. They hadn't. They were all too busy specializing. Outside, the sky was darkening. The front entrance guard had been told to let in anyone who came asking for the director. There was nothing else Brion could do until the Nijord rebels made contact. Irritation bit at him. At least Lee was doing something constructive. He could look in on her. He opened the door to the lab with a feeling of pleasant anticipation. It froze and shattered instantly. Her microscope was hooded and she was gone. She's having dinner, he thought, or she's in the hospital. The hospital was on the floor below and he went there first. "Of course she's here," Dr. Stein grumbled. "Where else should a girl in her condition be? She was out of bed long enough today. Tomorrow's the last day, and if you want to get any more work out of her before the deadline, you have better let her rest tonight. Better let the whole staff rest. I've been handing out tranquilizers like aspirin all day. They're falling apart." "The world's falling apart. How is Lee doing?" "Considering her shape, she's fine. Go in and see for yourself if you won't take my word for it. I have other patients to look at." "Are you that worried, doctor?" "Of course I am. I'm just as prone to the ills of the flesh as the rest of you. We're sitting on a ticking bomb and I don't like it. I'll do my job as long as it is necessary, but I'll also be glad to see the ships land to pull us out. The only skin that I really feel emotionally concerned about right now is my own. And if you want to be let in on a public secret, the rest of your staff feels the same way. So don't look forward to too much efficiency." "I ever did," Brion said. Lee's room was dark, illuminated only by the light of moons slanting in the window. Brion let himself in and closed the door behind him. Walking quietly, he went over to the bed. She was sleeping soundly, her breathing gentle and regular. A night's sleep now would do as much good as all the medication. He should have gone then. Instead, he sat down in the chair placed next to the head of the bed. The guards knew where he was. He could wait here just as well as any place else. It was a stolen moment of peace on a world at the brink of destruction. He was grateful for it. Everything looked less harsh in the moonlight, and he rubbed some of the tension from his eyes. Lee's face was ironed smooth by the light, beautiful and young, a direct contrast to everything else on this poisonous world. Her hand was outside of the covers, and he took it in his own, obeying a sudden impulse. Looking out of the window at the desert in the distance, he let the peace wash over him, forcing himself to forget for the moment that in one more day life would be stripped from this planet. Later, when he looked back at Lee, he saw that her eyes were open, though she hadn't moved. How long had she been awake? He jerked his hand away from hers, feeling suddenly guilty. Is the boss man looking after the serfs to see if they're fit for the treadmill in the morning? She asked. It was the kind of remark she had used with such frequency in the ship, though it didn't sound quite as harsh now, and she was smiling. Yet it reminded him too well of her superior attitude towards the rubes from the stellar sticks. Here he might be the director, but on ancient Earth he would be only one more gaping yokel. How do you feel? He asked, realizing and hitting the triteness of the words even as he said them. Terrible. I'll be dead by morning. Reach me a piece of fruit from that bowl, will you? My mouth tastes like an old boot heel. Wonder how fresh fruit ever got here. Probably a gift to the working classes from the smiling planetary murderers on Nijord. She took the apple Brion gave her and bit into it. Did you ever think of going to Earth? Brion was startled. This was close to his own thoughts about planetary backgrounds. There couldn't possibly be a connection, though. Never, he told her. Up until a few months ago, I never even considered leaving Anvhar. The 20s are such a big thing at home that it is hard to imagine that anything else exists while you are still taking part in them. Spare me the 20s, she pleaded. After listening to you and Ijhel, I know far more about them. And I shall ever care to know. But what about Anvhar itself? You have big city-states like Earth? Nothing like that. For its size, it has a very small population. No big cities at all. I guess the largest centers of population are around the schools, packing plants, things like that. Any exobiologists there? Lee asked, with a woman's eternal ability to make any general topic personal. At the universities, I suppose, though I wouldn't know for sure. And you must realize that when I say no big cities, I also mean no little cities. We aren't organized that way at all. I imagine the basic physical unit is family and the circle of friends. Friends get important quickly since the family breaks up when children are still relatively young. Something in the genes, I suppose. We all enjoy being alone. Suppose you might call it an inbred survival trait. Up to a point, she said, biting delicately into the apple. Carry that sort of thing too far and you end up with no population at all. A certain amount of proximity is necessary for that. Of course there is, and there must be some form of recognized relationship or control, that or complete promiscuity. On Anvhar, the emphasis is on personal responsibility, and that seems to take care of the problem. If we didn't have an adult way of looking at things, our kind of life would be impossible. Individuals are brought together either by accident or design, and with this proximity must be some certainty of relations. You're losing me, Lee protested. Either I'm still foggy from the dope or you are suddenly unable to speak a word of less than 4 syllables in length. You know, whenever this happens with you, I get the distinct impression that you are trying to cover up something. For Occam's sake, be specific. Bring together 2 of these hypothetical individuals and tell me what happens. Brion took a deep breath. He was in over his head and far from shore. Well, take a bachelor like myself. Since I like cross-country skiing, I make my home in this big house our family has, right at the edge of the broken hills. In summer, I looked after a drumtom herd, but after slaughtering my time was my own all winter. I did a lot of skiing and used to work for the 20s. Sometimes I would go visiting. Then again, people would drop in on me. Houses are few and far between on Anvhar. We don't even have locks on our front doors. You accept and give hospitality without qualification. Whoever comes, male, female, in groups, or just traveling alone, I get the drift. Life must be dull for a single girl on your iceberg planet. She must surely have to stay home a lot. Only if she wants to. Otherwise, she can go wherever she wishes and be welcomed as another individual. I suppose it is out of fashion in the rest of the galaxy, and would probably raise a big laugh on Earth. But a platonic, disinterested friendship between man and woman is an accepted thing on Anvhar. Sounds exceedingly dull. If you are all such cool and distant friends, what keeps your birth rate going? Brion felt his ears flushing, not quite sure if he was being teased or not. There are plenty of happy marriages, but it is up to the woman always to indicate if she is interested in a man. A girl who isn't interested won't get any proposals. I imagine this is a lot different from other planets, but so is our world. The system works well enough for us. Just about the opposite of Earth, Lee told him, dropping the apple core into a dish and carefully licking the tips of her fingers. I guess you Anvharians would describe Earth as a planetary hotbed of sin. The reverse of your system and going full blast all the time. There are far too many people there for comfort. Birth control came late and is still being fought, if you can possibly imagine that. There are just too many crack-brained ideas that have been long entrenched in custom. The world's overcrowded. Men, women, children, a boiling mob wherever you look, and all of the physically mature ones seem to be involved in the great game of love. The male is always the aggressor, and women take the most outrageous kinds of flattery for granted. At parties, these are always a couple of hot breaths of passion fanning your neck. A girl has to keep her spike heels filed sharp. She has. To what? A figure of speech, Brion, meaning you fight back all the time if you don't want to be washed under by the flood. Sounds rather. Brion weighed the word before he said it, but could find none other suitable, repellent. From your point of view, it would be. I'm afraid we get so used to it that we even take it for granted. Sociologically speaking, she stopped and looked at Brion's straight back and almost rigid post. Sure. Her eyes widened and her mouth opened in an unspoken O of sudden realization. I'm being a fool, she said. You weren't speaking generally at all. You had a very specific subject in mind, namely me. Please, Lee, you must understand. But I do, she laughed. All the time I thought you were being a frigid and hard-hearted lump of ice. You were really being very sweet, just playing the game in good old Anvharian. Tile, waiting for a sign from me. We'd still be playing by different rules if you hadn't had more sense than I, and finally realized that somewhere along the line we must have got our signals mixed, and I thought you were some kind of frosty off-world celibate. She let her hand go out and her fingers rustled through his hair, something she had been wanting to do for a long time. I had to, he said, trying to ignore the light touch of her fingers. Because I thought so much of you, I couldn't have done anything to insult you, until I began to worry where the insult would lie, since I knew nothing about your planet's mores. Well, you know now, she said very softly. The men aggress. Now that I understand, I think I like your way better, but I'm still not sure of all the rules. Do I explain that? Yes, Brion, I like you so very much. You are more man in one great big, wide-shouldered lump than I have ever met before. His arms were around her, holding her to him, and their lips sought each other's in the darkness. He wouldn't come in, sir. Just hammered on the door and said, I'm here, tell Brandd. Good enough, Brion said, seating his gun in the holster and sliding the extra clips into his pocket. I'm going out now, and I should return before dawn. Get one of the wheeled stretchers down here from the house. Piddle, I'll want it waiting when I get back. Outside the street was darker than he remembered. Brion frowned and his hand moved towards his gun. Someone had put all the nearby lights out of commission. There was just enough illumination from the stars to enable him to make out the dark bulk of a sandcar. The motor roared as soon as he had closed the door. Without lights, the sandcar churned a path through the city and out into the desert. Though the speed picked up, the driver still drove in the dark, feeling his way with a light touch on the controls. The ground rose, and when they reached the top of a flat mesa, he killed the engine. Neither the driver nor Brion had spoken a word since they left. A switch snapped, and the instrument lights came on. In their dim glow, Brion could just make out the other man's hawk-like profile. When he moved, Brion saw that his figure was cruelly shortened. Either accident or a mutated gene had warped his spine, hunching him forward in eternally bent supplication. Warped bodies are rare. His was the first Brion had ever seen. He wondered what series of events had kept him from medical attention all his life. This might explain the bitterness and pain in the man's voice. Did the mighty brains on Nijord bother to tell you that they have chopped another day off the deadline? That. This world is about to come to an end? Yes, I know, Brion said. That's why I'm asking your group for help. Our time is running out too fast. The man didn't answer, merely grunted and gave his full attention to the radar pings and glowing screen. The electronic senses reached out as he made a check on all the search frequencies to see if they were being followed. Where are we going? Brion asked. Out into the desert, the driver made a vague wave of his hand. Headquarters of the army. Since the whole thing will be blown up in another day, I guess I can tell you it's the only camp we have. All the cars, men, and weapons are based there, and Ihjel. He's the man in charge. Tomorrow it will be all gone, along with this cursed planet. What's your business with us? Shouldn't I be telling Ihjel that? Suit yourself. Satisfied with the instrument search, the driver kicked the car to life again and churned on across the desert. But we're a volunteer army, and we have no secrets from each other. Just from the fools at home who are going to kill this world. There was a bitterness in his words that he made no attempt to conceal. They fought among themselves and put off a firm decision so long that now they are forced to commit murder. From what I had heard, I thought that it was the other way around. They call your Ijhel army terrorists. We are. Because we are an army and we're at war. The idealists at home only understood that when it was too late. If they had backed us in the beginning, we would have blown open every black castle on Dis, searched until we found those bombs. But that would have meant wanton destruction and death. They wouldn't consider that. Now they are going to kill everyone, destroy everything. He flicked on the panel lights just long, enough to take a compass bearing, and Brion saw the tortured unhappiness in his twisted body. It's not over yet, Brion said. There is more than a day left, and I think I'm onto something that might stop the war, without any bombs being dropped. You're in charge of the Cultural Relationships Free Bread and Blankets Foundation, aren't you? What good can your bunch do when the shooting starts? None. But maybe we can put off the shooting. If you are trying to insult me, don't bother. My irritation quotient is very high. The driver just grunted at this, slowing down as they ran through a field of broken rock. What is it you want? He asked. We want to make a detailed examination of one of the Magter. Alive or dead, it doesn't make any difference. You wouldn't happen to have one around? No, we've fought with them often enough, but always on their home grounds. They keep all their casualties and a good number of ours. What good will it do you anyway? A dead one won't tell you where the bombs or the jump space projector is. I don't see why I should explain that to you, unless you are in charge. You are highs, aren't you? The driver grunted angrily and was silent while he drove. Finally, he asked, what makes you think that? Call it a hunch. You don't act very much like a sandcar driver. Ivor, for one thing. Of course your army may be all generals and no privates, but I doubt it. I also know that time has almost run out for all of us. This is a long ride, and it would be a complete waste of time if you just sat out in the desert and waited for me. By driving me yourself, you could make your mind up before we arrived. Have a decision ready whether you are going to help me or not. Are you? Yes, I'm. Eyes, but you still haven't answered my question. What do you want the body for? We're going to cut it open and take a good long look. I don't think the Magter are human. They are something living among men and disguised as men, but still not human. Secret aliens? Ihjel exploded the words in a mixture of surprise and disgust. Perhaps. The examination will tell us that. You're either stupid or incompetent, Ihjel said bitterly. The heat of Dis has cooked your brains in your head. I'll be no part of this kind of absurd plan. You must, Brion said, surprised at his own calmness. He could sense the other man's interest hidden behind his insulting manner. I don't even have to give you my reasons. In another day this world ends and you have no way to stop it. I just might have an idea that could work and you can't afford to take any chances. Not if you are really sincere. Either you are a murderer, killing Disans for pleasure, or you honestly want to stop the war. Which is it? You'll have your body all right, Ihjel grated, hurling the car viciously around a spire of rock. Not that it will accomplish anything, but I can find no fault in killing another Magter. We can fit your operation into our plans without any trouble. This is the last night, and I have sent every one of my teams out on raids. We're breaking into as many Magter towers as possible before dawn. There is a slim chance that we might uncover something. It's really just shooting in the dark, but it's all we can do now. My own team is waiting, and you can ride along with us. The others left earlier. We're going to hit a small tower on this side of the city. We raided it once before and captured a lot of small arms that they had stored there. There is a good chance that they may have been stupid enough to store something there again. Sometimes the Magter seem to suffer from a complete lack of imagination. You have no idea just how right you are, Brion told him. The sandcar slowed down now, as they approached a slab-sided mesa that rose vertically from the desert. They crunched across broken rocks, leaving no tracks. A light blinked on the dashboard, and Ihjel stopped instantly and killed the engine. They climbed out, stretching and shivering in the cold desert night. It was dark walking in the shadow of the cliff, and they had to feel their way along a path through the tumbled boulders. A sudden blaze of light made Brion wince and shield his eyes. Near him, on the ground, was the humming shape of a cancellation projector. sending out a fan-shaped curtain of vibration that absorbed all the light rays falling upon it. This incredible blackness made a light-proof wall for the recessed hollow at the foot of the cliff. In this shelter, under the overhang of rock, were 3 open sandcars. They were large and armor-plated, warlike in their scarred gray paint. Men sprawled, talked, and polished their weapons. Everything stopped when Ihjel and Brion appeared. "Load up," Ihjel called out. "We're going to attack now, same plan I outlined earlier. Get Telt over here." Talking to his own men, some of the harshness was gone from his voice. The tall soldiers of Ijhel moved in ready obedience to the commander. They loomed over his bent figure, most of them twice as tall as him. Yet there was no hesitation in jumping when he commanded. They were the body of the Ijhel striking force. He was the brains. A square-cut, compact man rolled up to Ihjel and saluted with a leisurely flick of his hand. He was weighted and slung about with packs and electronic instruments. His pockets bulged with small tools. "This is Telt," Ihjel said to Brion. "He'll take care of you. Telt's my personal technical squad. Goes along on all my operations with his meters to test the interiors of the Descent forts. So far he's found no trace of a jump space generator or excess radioactivity that might indicate a bomb. Since he's useless and you're useless, you can both take care of each other. Use the car we came in." Telt's wide face split in a frog-like grin. His voice was hoarse and throaty. "Wait, just wait. Someday those needles gonna flicker and all our troubles be over. What you want me to do with the stranger?" "Supply him with a corpse, one of the Magter," Ihjel said. "Take it where he wants and then report back here." Ihjel scowled at Telt. "Someday your needles will flicker. Poor fool. This is day." He turned away and waved the men into their sandcars. "He likes me," Telt said, attaching a final piece of equipment. "You can tell because he calls me names like that. He's a great man, Ihjel is, but they never found out until it was too late. Hand me that meter, will you?" Brion followed the technician out to the car and helped him load his equipment aboard. When the larger cars appeared out of the darkness, Telt swung around after them. They snaked forward in a single line through the rocks until they came to the desert of rolling sand dunes. Then they spread out in line abreast and rushed towards their goal. Telt hummed to himself hoarsely as he drove. He broke off suddenly and looked at Brion. "What you want the dead dis for?" "A theory," Brion answered sluggishly. He had been half napping in the chair, taking the opportunity for some rest before the attack. "I'm still looking for a way to avert the end." "You and Ihjel," Telt said with satisfaction. "Couple of idealists. Trying to stop a war you didn't start. They never would listen to Ihjel. He told them in the beginning exactly what would happen, and he was right. They always thought his ideas were crooked like him, growing up alone in the hill camp with his back too twisted and too old to be fixed when he finally did come out. Ijhel is twisted the same way, made himself an authority on war. War on Ijhel. That's like being an ice cube specialist in hell. But he knew all about it, but they never would let him use what he knew. Put Granddaddy Kraft in charge instead. But Ihjel is in charge of an army now. All volunteers, too few of them and too little money. Too little and too damned late to do any good. I'll never be good enough. And for this we get called butchers." There was a catch in Telt's voice now, an undercurrent of emotion he couldn't suppress. "At home they think we like to kill, think we're insane. They can't understand we're doing the only thing that has to be done." He broke off as he quickly locked on the brakes and killed the engine. The line of sandcars had come to a stop. Ahead, just visible over the dunes, was the summit of a dark tower. "We walk from here," Telt said, standing and stretching. "We can take our time because the other boys go in first, soften things up. Then you and I head for the subcellar for a radiation check and find you a handsome corpse." Walking at first, then crawling when the dunes no longer shielded them, they crept up on the Descent keep. Dark figures moved ahead of them, stopping only when they reached the crumbling black walls. They didn't use the ascending ramp, but made their way up the sheer outside face of the ramparts. "Line throwers," Telt whispered. "Anchor themselves when the missile hits, have some kind of quick-sitting goo. Then we go up the filament with a line-climbing motor. Ihjel invented them." "Is that the way you and I are going in?" Brion asked. "No, we get out of the climbing. I told you we hit this rock once before. I know the layout inside." He was moving while he talked, carefully pacing the distance around the base of the tower. "Should be right about here." High-pitched keening sliced the air and the top of the Magter building burst into flame. Automatic weapons hammered above them. Something fell silently through the night and hit heavily on the ground near them. Attacks started, Telt shouted. We have to get through now, while all the creepies are fighting it out on top. He pulled a plate-shaped object from one of his bags and slapped it hard against the wall. It hung there. He twisted the back of it, pulled something, and waved Brion to the ground. Shaped charge, should blow straight in, but you never can tell. The ground jumped under them, and the ringing thud was a giant fist punching through the wall. A cloud of dust and smoke rolled clear, and they could see the dark opening in the rock, a tunnel driven into the wall by the directional force of the explosion. Telt shone a light through the hole at the crumbled chamber inside. Nothing to worry about from anybody who was leaning against this wall, but let's get in and out of this black beehive before the ones upstairs come down to investigate. Shattered rock was thick on the floor, and they skidded and tumbled over it. Telt pointed the way with his light, down a sharply angled ramp. Underground chambers in the rock. They always store their stuff down there, a smoky black sphere arced out of the tunnel's mouth, hitting at their feet. Telt just gaped, but even as it hit the floor, Brion was jumping forward. He caught it with the side of his foot, kicking it back into the dark opening of the tunnel. Telt hit the ground next to him as the orange flame of an explosion burst below. Bits of shrapnel rattled from the ceiling and wall behind them. Grenades? Telt gasped. They only used them once before. Or can't have many. Gotta warn highs. He plugged a throat mic into the transmitter on his back and spoke quickly into it. There was a stirring below, and Brion poured a rain of fire into the tunnel. They're catching it bad on top, too. We gotta pull out. Go first and I'll cover you. I came for my Desan. I'm not leaving until I get one. You're crazy. You're dead if you stay. Telt was scrambling back towards their crumbled entrance. As he talked, his back was turned when Brion fired. The Magter appeared silently as the shadow of death. They charged without a sound, running with expressionless faces into the bullets. Two died at once, curling and folding. The third one fell at Brion's feet, shot, pierced, dying, but not yet dead. Leaving a crimson track, it hunched closer, lifting its knife to Brion. He didn't move. How many times must you murder a man? Or was it a man? His mind and body rebelled against the killing and was almost ready to accept death himself, rather than kill again. Telt's bullets tore through the body, and it dropped with grim finality. There's your corpse. Now get it out of here, Telt screeched. Between them, they worked the sodden weight of the dead Magter through the hole, their exposed backs crawling with the expectation of instant death. There were no more attacks as they ran from the tower than a grenade that exploded too far behind them to do any harm. One of the armored sandcars circled the keep, headlights blazing, keeping up a steady fire from its heavy weapons. The attackers climbed into it as they beat a retreat. Telt and Brion dragged the Desan behind them, struggling through the loose sand toward the circling car. Telt glanced over his shoulder and broke into a shambling run. They're following us? He gasped. The first time they ever chased us after a raid. They must know we have the body, Brion said. Leave it behind, Telt choked. Too heavy to carry, anyway. I'd rather leave you, Brion snapped. Let me have it. He pulled the corpse away from the unresisting Telt and heaved it across his shoulders. Now use your gun to cover us. Telt threw a rain of slugs back towards the dark figures following them. The driver must have seen the flare of their fire because the truck turned and started towards them. It braked in a choking cloud of dust, and ready hands reached to pull them up. Brion pushed the body in ahead of himself and scrambled after it. The truck engine throbbed, and they churned away into the blackness, away from the gutted tower. You know, that was more like kind of a joke when I said I'd leave the corpse behind, Telt told Brion. You didn't believe me, did you? Yes, Brion said, holding the dead weight of the Magter against the truck's side. I thought you meant it. Ah, Telt grumbled. You're as bad as highs. Take things too seriously. Brion suddenly realized that he was wet with blood, his clothing sodden. His stomach rose at the thought, and he clutched the edge of the sandcar. Killing like this was too personal. Talking abstractedly about a body was one thing, but murdering a man and lifting his dead flesh and feeling his blood warm upon you is an entirely different matter. Yet the Magter weren't human, he knew that. The thought was only mildly comforting. After they had reached the rest of the waiting sandcars, the raiding party split up. Each one goes in a different direction, Telt said, so they can't track us to the base. He clipped a piece of paper next to the compass and kicked the motor into life. Wheel me. Ik a big you in the desert and end up in Hovedstad. I got the course here. Then I'll dump you and your friend and beat it back to our camp. You're not still burned at me for what I said, are you? Are you? Brion didn't answer. He was staring fixedly out of the side window. What's doing? Telt asked. Brion pointed out at the rushing darkness. Over there, he said, pointing to the growing light on the horizon. Dawn, Telt said. Lotta ray. In on your planet. Didn't you ever see the sun come up before? Not on the last day of a world. Lock it up, Telt grumbled. You give me the crawls. I know they're going to be blasted, but at least I know I did everything I could to stop it. How do you think they are going to be feeling at home on Nijord from tomorrow on? Maybe we can still stop it, Brion said, shrugging off the feeling of gloom. Telt's only answer was a erdless sound of disgust. By the time they had cut a large loop in the desert, the sun was high in the sky. The daily heat begun. Their course took them through a chain of low, flinty hills that cut their speed almost to zero. They ground ahead in low gear while Telt sweated and cursed, struggling with the controls. Then they were on firm sand and picking up speed towards the city. As soon as Brion saw Hovedstad clearly, he felt a clutch. Fear. From somewhere in the city, a black plume of smoke was rising. It could have been one of the deserted buildings aflame, a minor blaze. Yet the closer they came, the greater the tension grew. Brion didn't dare put it into words himself. It was Telt who vocalized the thought. A fire or something, coming from your area somewhere close to your building. Within the city, they saw the first signs of destruction. Broken rubble on the streets. The smell of greasy smoke in their nostrils. More and more people appeared, going in the same direction they were. The normally deserted streets of Hovedstad were now almost crowded. Descends, obvious by their bare shoulders, mixed with the few offworlders who still remained. Brion made sure the tarpaulin was well wrapped around the body before they pushed slowly through the growing crowd. I don't like all this publicity, Telt complained, looking at them. Ijhel, it's the last day or I'd be turning back. They know our cars. We've raided them often enough. Turning a corner, he braked suddenly. Ahead was destruction. Black, broken rubble had been churned into desolation. It was still smoking, pink tongues of flame licking over the ruins. A fragment of wall fell with a rumbling crash. It's your building, the foundation building, Telt shouted. They've been here ahead of us, must have used the radio. To call a raid. They did a job, explosive of some kind. Hope was dead. Dis was dead. In the ruin ahead, mixed and broken with the other rubble, were the bodies of all the people who had trusted him. Lee, beautiful and cruelly deadly. Dr. Stein, his patients, fossil, all of them. He had kept them on this planet, and now they were dead. Every one of them. Dead. Murderer.